Hello and welcome to another edition of Final Cut Pro Help Live. My name is Jared Ewing and thank you for tuning in. Thank you for bearing with us through our technical stuff we dealt with yesterday. We're hoping all the issues with the stream are worked out. If you have any issues with it, see any lag, all of that good stuff that you don't want to see, go ahead and put it in the comments. I love hearing the feedback. That helps us make this stream the best that it can be. Now, we've been answering viewers' questions this week, and we're going to continue doing that in this episode here. I have two topics that I want to cover. Both are relating to getting content from other applications into Final Cut Pro 10. We're going to look at creating some simple background music using the app GarageBand, which is a free app from the Mac App Store. And then we're also going to create a very simple call-out title using Motion, and then we'll import that title into Final Cut. We'll also create a very basic transition using Motion, and I'll show you how to get that into Final Cut as well. Just so you know, this isn't designed to be teaching you how to make music, how to make transitions, or how to make titles. This is more about the process of getting that content from those apps and putting it into your project inside of Final Cut. So the first one that I want to show is going to be using GarageBand. So we're going to open up the app GarageBand. Let me go ahead and move it over to my display here so you can see it. I'm going to shrink down the window so it's a little bit easier to see. And this is actually what the GarageBand interface looks like when you've already opened up a song. So let me hit the red circle here. I'm going to close that out and use Command N to create a new project, and you'll see a window that looks like this. I'm going to close out of Final Cut here too. We'll just have GarageBand open. And if you've never used GarageBand before, GarageBand allows you to create and record music, audio, podcasts, all of that good stuff. You can also learn to play an instrument inside of GarageBand. So when you open up this first window and it says to choose a project, you're going to want to start just with an empty project here. On the left side, you could choose to learn to play an instrument or get other things through there. But in this case, we're just going to start with an empty project because we want to create some very simple background music that we can use inside a project. So you can use this as well. What's great about a GarageBand, it comes with a bunch of software instruments and pre-recorded loops that you can use in your project. So now it says to choose a track type. This is the type of audio that you would be recording if you were doing this from scratch. In our case here, we are going to be using pre-built stuff that's already in there. So it's not too important which one you choose here for your first track. I'm just going to stick with software instrument on the left side here because that's the default, and click on create. Now, when you do that, you may see a number of things show up on your screen. For me, they showed up over on my second screen here that I've connected. So let me bring it over. You might see this software keyboard come up. If that's the case, you can go up to the window menu, and there's an option here that says hide musical typing, or Command K. We don't need that keyboard up. This would actually allow you to use your typing keyboard to play music. Kind of cool if you want to record some stuff from scratch. But again, we're just doing very simple pre-recorded loops. We're not going to be building our music from nothing. We're going to use the pre-recorded loops that are in there. So now that we've done that, this is the interface of GarageBand. You're going to go all the way up to the top right corner. You can ignore all the stuff that's here. Go up to the top right corner and hit this middle button here that's actually a loop browser. It's just a little loop icon. And this brings up our loops. And if you've just installed GarageBand on your Mac, like I've done, you might see it here where it says it's indexing the Apple Loops library, but it should bring up the loops at some point then, like we see here. So there are thousands of loops if we start scrolling through this list. There's ones that are going to have this white text and others that'll be faded. If it's faded, that just means it hasn't been installed yet. And you'll see a little download button on the right side if you want to go and download those loops. All of these things here come for free with GarageBand. This is not something you're paying extra for. You can certainly go out and buy additional sounds, things like those music lessons. There are additional things you can buy, but if it just has a little download link here, you can download and install that. This is free content that's inside of GarageBand that comes with the app, and you can just click on any of these loops to play them back. If it's in white, it's already downloaded in there and ready to go. You can see here, though, I have a bunch of kind of random sound effects. I have an ambient beat here, electric piano. These are all mixed together, but we can click on any of these to hear them. Notice at the bottom, we get a little waveform as it's playing back this beat. And when it gets to the end, it just loops back around. That's why these are called loops. They're designed to be something that you can continue over and over and over again. Okay, so those are the sounds there that you have and the loops here. Now this list here, lowest to the lower right corner, over 6,000 items. This is a long list to go through. So at the top, use these searches to find the loop you actually want to use. So if you want a specific instrument, click on instrument. You'll get a list of them at the top here. You can also narrow it down by genre or a specific descriptor here. Now, this gets very complex as you start adding various pieces to your music. So we're going to keep it simple here, just with some drums and maybe a little guitar in here. So I'm just going to pick two pieces of audio that we can use here. Now this search, you can click on multiple items here to narrow down the search even more precisely. So you could have, like in this case, we have all drums. I could have a drum kit versus an actual beat. I can click on those to narrow it down. But even with that, we still have, 1,600 items there. So still a lot of sounds. So again, click on them to hear what they sound like. It's a bit electric there. Let's go down towards the middle here. And again, just clicking on them to hear what they sound like. So if this looks good and I want to use this, I can then just click and drag this into my project to use that loop. And notice you're just dragging it into this gray area here at the bottom, and then let go of it and it'll add that loop to your project. You don't want to add it to your classical electric piano track that's over here on the left side. We don't actually need that one. So I'm just going to select it and hit the delete key to remove that. But here is my drums that I've added, and I'm going to click and drag this all the way to the left side. Unlike Final Cut Pro's magnetic timeline, this timeline here in GarageBand, you do have to very precisely put each of these pieces of music, these clips essentially, into the spot where you want it to play. So if we want this drums kit here just to be at the beginning, I'll drag it all the way to the left side there so it adds it. To make the loop last for a longer period of time, I can go up to the top right corner of the loop, click and drag this to the right, and then it's looping it over and over and over again. Now, if you're a little bit confused about how much time we're dealing with up here, it's because it's written in a way for musicians. If you're used to reading music and that side of it, this will be familiar with it. However, if you're like me, you're an editor from Final Cut, you're used to seeing things in time. So you can change our little time viewer up here in GarageBand to time, and it'll view it as a length of time, which may be perfect if you're trying to create a piece of audio that's maybe 30 seconds because you're going to create a post for Instagram or another place. You can then edit based on time so it lines things up for you. And then in our timeline here, I'm just using my trackpad here to pinch to zoom out. You can also use this little slider at the top right to zoom in or zoom out. But now that I've changed this time viewer to time instead of being on beats, you'll notice at the top, this is more of a timeline. I can see when it gets to about a minute long. Maybe I want to drag out to have my song be 1 minute, and I can do that there. Unlike Final Cut Pro, which has autosave, GarageBand is not saving this stuff automatically. You'll notice at the top center here, it's set as untitled. Make sure to use Command S. Command S saves your project. You want to do this regularly. So in this case, this is just going to be my background loop. So I'm going to call it background loop. If you watch any of my streams, you know you got to name things, label things. and it's just going to save it into the GarageBand folder, which in this case is fine for my purpose here. So now that I have saved it initially, I'm going to periodically be using the Command S shortcut to update and save that project. Make sure you do the same thing, because if GarageBand quits unexpectedly, something weird happens, you're going to lose all those edits that you made in between the last save and when it quit. So now I have some drums, so let's get another song. I'm going to hit the orange X up here to clear my search, and let's just go in and get a guitar. We'll just get an acoustic guitar, and let's get something here. All right, let's grab that Road Trip Summer guitar, put that down, and again, just creating a simple loop. This is not designed to be anything too complex. And I'll drag from the top right to extend that the length of the project. All right, so that's it. I'm happy with this. I'm ready to send this over to Final Cut. So once you have your song mixed and done, you're gonna go up to the Share menu, and there's an option here in GarageBand that says Share the song to the Media Browser. And that's actually what we're gonna do. So I'm gonna hit Media Browser. The app kind of takes over, it goes through and shares that song out. Notice I wasn't asked where I needed to save the project or anything like that. When you share to the media browser, there's nothing else you have to do. All you need to do is go up to Share, click Song to Media Browser, and that's it. You're done in GarageBand. So once you've done that, if you haven't saved, use Command S to save, and then you can use Command Q to quit out of GarageBand. I'm going to continue my download of the loops there in the background just so I can get more of those in there. And now that I have saved my song to the media browser, I'm going to go back into Final Cut. And I like to use Spotlight here, so Command Space to bring up Spotlight. I just type in a couple letters in the word funnel and hit Return, and it knows that I want to go into Final Cut Pro. Now, where is the media browser inside of Final Cut Pro 10? If you go up to the top left corner of the browser, we have a couple items here, and this essentially lets you browse the media, these two tabs here. There's the photo and audio sidebar here, which goes into apps like your Photos app or music. Apple Music is accessible there, and we also have GarageBand. The third one over goes into titles and generators, but really this middle one here, this is your media browser, and this is allowing us to browse the media that's on this computer that has been shared. So I can see all the built-in sound effects. I can see music. This is from your music app. And then above that, we have GarageBand itself. If you have these apps installed, you'll see them. So I have Logic installed. I see that as well. And then, of course, Photos is up at the top there. So if I click on GarageBand, notice here, my background loop is already in here. Didn't have to do anything else. It's there ready to go. Because we shared it from GarageBand, it put it right in there. And if I want to use this in the project, I just click and drag that background loop down into my project, and there it is now on the primary storyline. I can increase the size of this just so it's easier to see, but there's my background loop. If I hit the space bar, now we hear that loop. And you can see we made this project about a minute long. If we needed to make any changes to this, we would just go back into GarageBand, make the changes, and then share it to the media browser again. So that's the first topic I wanted to cover, which is how you can create background music using tools you should already have, like GarageBand. And the one thing to remember about this that a lot of newer editors just don't even think about is the reason you would go through these steps is this music is royalty free. This is music you can use without having to go and get the rights to it. If you just use someone's song that they've created, most likely that song is restricted, it's protected, and someone has the rights to it, so you can't just go and publish that onto YouTube or share your video out to somewhere. And that's kind of a pain if you spend a lot of time editing a video and you go to share it and then all of a sudden it's saying, no, you can't post this on YouTube, or someone else is going to be able to post it and get the ad revenue, things like that. So that's a big reason you want to do this and get those loops in there. Now, if you do want much better music, that's where you're going to have to go and pay for it, or have someone teach you how you can mix all of that stuff together, because just like video editing is a complex process, audio is just as complex, if not even more complex, with some of the things that you can do there. All right, so that's the first topic I wanted to cover, which is getting those loops in. The second topic I want to cover is how do you get with this third tab over here? You have these titles and generators. So how do you get a title or a generator that you've created inside of Motion and bring it here into Final Cut Pro 10? We're also going to look at how to get a transition into Final Cut from there. So let's go and switch over to the Motion application. So I'm going to do Command Q just to quit out of Final Cut here. And I'm going to use Command Space again, start typing in Motion, hit return, and we'll launch Motion. If you don't know, Motion is a $50 app from the Mac App Store here in the US, and it is what is used to create many of the plugins that you see inside of Final Cut. Things like we see here on the first page with effects, generators, transitions, and titles. So if you don't use Motion, it's probably a good idea to start learning it, because you would save a ton of money without having to buy all these additional plugins. You can just create this stuff yourself here in Motion. Now, in the left column, I'll give you a brief overview. We do have our various things we can create, and there's some compositions here that are pre-built. I'm just going to create really basic from a blank Motion project here, just a very basic call-out title and a transition that we can then use in Final Cut. So I'm just going to start here with my Motion project. On the right side, I can choose a preset for various things here, but then I'm going to click on Open in the lower right corner. So the preset, you should select what your projects are. Try to match this up with what your things are. So if you're doing a bunch of 4K stuff, choose 4K. If most of the things you do are 1080, you can select 1080 here. And you can also set a duration here. We can change this later on if needed in Motion. Then I'll click on Open, and here we are in Motion. Very different interface from Final Cut as far as the windows and the layout that's here, but you do have a toolbar at the top that allows you to show or hide various areas of the interface. So if you don't see this, if you open it up and something's not visible to you here, most likely you can click on these buttons at the top to show them. So as an example, the project pane hides this area on the left side. I could go to the inspector here and see all the various inspector spots on here. You can go up to the window menu and go down to window layout to get our classic layout, or you can show or hide other various areas of the interface. So that's what you have there if you need any of that. I'm not going to go too much further into Motion specific tips and tricks. That's something we have other videos on this channel. You can also get an awesome guide to Motion. That book is available on Amazon, Apple Books, all the various bookstores, and goes into a lot more detail of the basics of Motion. So I'm just going to create a simple call-out title. And a call-out title is trying to bring attention to something. So to do that, I'm going to go down here and get my line. I'm going to click and drag the line. I can hold Shift here to have the line be on the 45-degree axis there. I'm going to go into my inspector under the shape inspector here. I'm going to put an end cap here with an arrow so that we get a little arrow pointing. I'm actually going to put it on the beginning because do a round end cap. So on the start here, I'm going to have the arrow. That way it's pointing at whatever's in the middle of the screen. I can increase the width to make the arrow a little bit bigger, and then make the arrow length and width a little bit bigger there. So we have a bigger arrow. You can see it very clearly. It's pointing to something. And we'll also get a text track here, because this will be our call out title. And if you're creating a title in Motion, most likely you're creating this to be used for something specific. So you can put in what you want here for that text and what it's going to look like. You can customize all kinds of things. Motion is a very it's a very complex app, but it has many ways for you to customize this stuff as far as you want to go here. So let's say I've done that. Similar to GarageBand, you do want to do the Command S to save your project as you're working on it. Unlike Final Cut, it does not have the same auto save feature, at least as of right now, to be able to save it as you're going. And Motion, because of how complex it is, can quit on you unexpectedly. You don't want to lose stuff that you've been working on. So make sure to use Command S to save that. Now, if that's all we do, this is not available inside of Final Cut yet. We have to send it over and get it into Final Cut. So you can go up to the File menu, go down to Share, and there's options to export this out. Similar to Final Cut, you can export this and create a movie. However, if you're trying to create a callout title and you want it to be able to be available inside of Final Cut, what I recommend doing is converting this project. So under the File menu, you have an option to convert the project to, and you have the options of how you want to convert it. So in this case, it is a callout title. So I'm going to convert this to a title. And what that does, it's going to bring up an option for you to say a title source. So this would be a layer or a placeholder that's going to be used in Final Cut. So I'm going to create a new placeholder and hit convert. And that placeholder is this title background that's showing up here. Basically, that's the clip that's going to appear inside of Final Cut. All right, so that should be good. Now I can hit Command S again. Because it is the first time I'm saving it as a title, I do have to select some options, and this is the template name that's going to show up inside of Final Cut. So I'm just going to call it my callout title. Again, make sure you name these things so that you can keep things organized. If you have more than one, you'll want to get those named correctly there. We can then add it to a category. I don't have any right now, so I'm going to create a new category. I'm just going to call it my Final Cut Pro Help category and hit create. And then if you want, you can create a theme and save preview and all that. I'm not going to do that here, but you can do that. The theme helps organize when you have many, many custom titles that you created. Okay, so now we've essentially created a callout title using Motion. We went up to File and converted that project from a composition to a title and basically set everything up. So we're good. I'm going to do Command Q here to quit out of Motion. And I'm going to go back into Final Cut Pro. And let's see how we do that. So what you should take away from this so far is that this is a fairly easy process. There's not a lot of steps that you have to do to get those Motion projects into Final Cut. Notice now in my titles and generators sidebar, I have this new category called @Final Cut Pro Help, and there's my callout title. If I want to use it, I can click and drag the callout title down into my project, drop it, and it puts it there. All right, so fairly straightforward. Let me go get a clip here, and we'll just actually call something out. So let's use this image here. I'll drag my title over. Extend that picture, and I'll do Command plus a couple times to zoom in on the timeline here. So now there's my callout title. If I select the title track, I can see it up here. Not much that I can do with it. Notice the arrow, I can't move the arrow around. I can move the text. That's something that's nice with titles. But the arrow itself, I don't get many options with that. I could go and use the transform tool to move the arrow, but you can see that's kind of moving everything that's there. So one other tip I wanted to point out, I'm going to switch back to Motion, is that you can publish parameters from Motion to make them available inside of Final Cut Pro 10 here. So as an example, my callout title had that text that just says callout title, and it had the arrow that's pointing down. So back here in Motion, I'm going to go to my Final Cut Pro Help titles. Notice that new category we created is there. There's my callout title. I can double click on it to open it. And if I click on the line, I want to be able to change where this arrow is pointing. And to do that, I'm going to go into the inspector. And here's my geometry tab here. This has the various points that are on here. And if I click on this little drop down menu next to control points, again, I'm under shape, geometry. Here's control points. On the right side, I can click on this and then say publish. When you publish a parameter, what you're saying is make this parameter available inside of Final Cut Pro 10. So now I'll do Command S to save it. I'm going to quit Motion again, Command Q. And now we're back here in Final Cut. I'm going to go back up to my Titles and Generator sidebar, get my callout title and bring it down here. I can delete the original one from before. And now notice here in Final Cut with that title selected, up here under Publish Parameters in the inspector on Final Cut, we now have the animation here for that point. So we have the ability now to change where that arrow is pointing. So that's the other big part of sharing stuff from Motion is once you've put it as a title, publish the parameters that you want available inside of Final Cut, and then you don't have to keep going back to Motion to update those various titles. These ones too, any of the ones that have a little keyframe diamond on the right side, you can animate that. So in this case, if you were trying to call out maybe a football that someone's throwing, you could actually animate it so that arrow follows the football along as you're going throughout the project. Okay, so that's how you create a very simple callout title in Motion and how you publish it to make it available inside of Final Cut Pro 10. I want to show the same thing, but with transitions. Now, if I'm doing this, I'm going to quit out of Final Cut, and I'm just going to go back into Motion, Command Space Motion. And we saw how to convert a project from a composition into a title. So this process, I'm going to show you how to create these from scratch, because if you know what you're trying to create, you don't have to do that convert step. You can, instead of creating a Motion project, if you know you're trying to create a transition, which is what we're going to do here, you can select Final Cut Transition right from the start. And what that'll do is give you all of the components that are needed to make this transition work inside of Final Cut Pro 10. For a transition, you need these A and B points here because you need the incoming clip, and then some transition happens, and then you end up with your outgoing clip, which in this case is this red clip. So we're going from green to red. So if I want to create some kind of a transition here, we could put all kinds of animation and other things onto our clips to make that happen. I'm just going to do a slide just from scratch using a line here. So I'll go get my line tool again. Just going to drag that line across the page. With the line selected, I can go and get my properties to move this around, and we'll just have this go from top down. So my line's up at the top. I'm going to go to the beginning of my transition, add a keyframe, go to the end of my transition, and drag that line all the way down. And there's already a transition like this inside of Final Cut, but I want this to want to create this just so you can see how this animates. Now you'll notice here the line I created, and it starts right here. So on the timeline, I'm going to extend that line so it goes to the beginning of the project. Now we should see that animating all the way down. And then I'm going to change the crop for my transition A so that as the line is going down, the crop will follow that line. And then as it's cropped, we'll start to see the transition B part. And again, if this is confusing, I'm going kind of quickly through this part because this is not designed to be a lesson in the motion stuff here. This is more on the interactions and how this works with Final Cut. So to do this, I'm going to animate my crop on my transition here. And we'll just be cropping down from the top spot there, and so that you can see that second clip. So I'm going to add a keyframe to the top. We'll go over here to the end, and we'll crop it all the way down. I can go in the middle here and see how it's following it. Just want to make sure it's following that line, so I might add a couple extra keyframes here. So that it's roughly on this line. Not going to be too precise here, but you get the idea, right? So it's gone from the first clip to the second clip now. Pretty good. I'm happy with it for now. We can always come back and make more changes in the future. I'm going to hit Command S, and just like we saw with the title, we have to create a template and a category. We have to send all these over. So this is just a top-down transition. So I'll call it that. My category, I'm going to create a new category just like before. And don't want to do that, because that just makes that window huge. So yeah, I'll do the at Final Cut Pro Help as the category, and let's create a theme here just so you can see this. I'll just call this wipes, and I'll hit create. And yeah, so I have that information entered in there, and I'll hit publish. These things are very, very quick, so they tend to publish pretty quickly. Like, that's already done. And I'm happy with it. We'll do Command Q, quit out of Motion, Command Space to get back into Final Cut. But yeah, if you notice, I mean, there's nothing else. Really just Command S to save that title there. And same thing there with the transition. We do Command Space. So I'm going to do Command minus here a couple times on the timeline. I'm going to get a second clip that we can transition into. And let's do, that one's pretty outdoorsy and green. I'll try to get something that is different. We'll get this squinty dog picture here. And then let's go into our transition browser over here on the right side. You'll notice we have a new category on the left column called at Final Cut Pro Help. This was the category that we selected when we saved it. And there's the top-down transition. I can swipe across it to see a preview, which looks pretty straightforward, right? And this is the theme. Notice it's under this wipes category. That's what the theme is. So when you're browsing transitions, I don't know if we have any with these. Yeah, with the pre-built ones, I think just Stylized has them. But this boxes, bulletin board, cinema, these are the themes. So the theme essentially just lets you break up your transition browser to make it a little bit easier to find things or organize stuff. But yeah, then if I drag that transition there onto our clip here, and I'm just going to use the arrow to swipe through it, we can see that transition happening. I can do I and O to set a range here and play back that range just so you can see that transition happening. Right, so very, very straightforward. There's nothing too exciting about this transition, but you can see how we got it from Motion and published it so that it made it available inside of Final Cut Pro. And what's really great about these transitions and titles is you can right click or control click on these, even the ones that are built in, and there's an option to open it in Motion. So you can say open in Motion from Final Cut. In the background, it's opening up Motion. It's going to launch it with that project. You can make changes, customize it, maybe publish additional parameters that you want available, and then save it and it'll be ready to go. So in this case, if I wanted to change the line, maybe I didn't like how the line looked, I can go and make it much thicker, and I'm going to change the color of it just so it's really obvious that it's changed. But I changed the transition. I can do Command S to save it, Command Tab to switch back to Final Cut. And looking in my transition browser, you can see it hasn't updated it just yet here. Sometimes switching out and back does. You can see the preview icon's updated there, but it hasn't updated the little preview movie. But let's delete this transition, and we'll go in and add the new one. And notice now we have our blue line transitioning down to swipe and change between those two clips. All right, so I hope that answered the question of how you can get both transitions and then also titles that you've created inside of Motion and make them available inside of Final Cut Pro 10. If you don't have Motion, if you haven't purchased that yet, I recommend taking a look at it from the internet. If you go onto Safari or just your web browser that you use, Motion is an application from Apple, so just go to apple.com. And you can do /Motion or /Final Cut Pro. It'll be there too. But if you go to /Motion, you'll see a really nice overview of what Motion can create. Things like these titles. It's got the bokeh effect. And you can see some pretty complex titles, including effects, transitions, and other things that you can create there. And really, it is a complex app, and it can take a while to learn. But you can save a ton of money on buying third-party things with the one purchase of Motion. So I do recommend doing that and taking a look at that. And if you do have questions with that, you can put them in the comments here or send me an email, finalcutprohelp@me.com. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to be informed the next time we go live. Thank you everyone for tuning in.